Hi, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live broadcast on the release of the ISM Services PMI Report. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm a senior writer and editor for Inside Supply Management. That's Institute for Supply Management's member publication. And we hope those of you in the U.S. had a terrific 4th of July weekend. And wherever you're joining us from today, welcome to our discussion as we break down the Services PMI data for June. Business activity and new orders growth slowed but remained strong, and there was some relief on prices as employment returned to expansion. There might have even been a kick from soccer there, which we'll talk about shortly, and inventory levels leveled off as the Services PMI was down slightly to 54%. And like we did for the manufacturing report last week, I'm sure we'll discuss some developments around the world that had an impact on the services sector. And so let's bring in the chair of the ISM Services Business Survey Committee. And I'm happy to say, again, a co-author for a feature article in the upcoming issue of our magazine that you'll want to check out. We'll provide more details on that in a bit. But his name is Steve Miller. Steve, how you doing? And what stood out to you about the June data?
What stood out after I looked at it for a while, I was a little disappointed that the number was down month over month slightly. And then looking deeper, it's the first we had employment pop up into expansion territory again. Welcome, a welcome number. And what that meant is that all 4 sub-indexes that make up the PMI were in expansion territory, and all 4 were above their 12-month average. So really good signs there. And then a little bit of icing on the cake, even though prices are still going up for the 109th month in a row, we got to see a little bit of relief in the number.
Yeah. As we discussed, I discussed with Sue Spence on last week, got a ceasefire and negotiations and a temporary accord, at least with Iran. That had a big impact on oil prices, as you noted in the report. Probably the most eye-popping number, as it has been for the last several months, is the prices index. Eye-popping in a good way this month, 67.7%. Obviously, that's still very robust prices growth, but came under 70% for the first time in 4 months. And 3 commodities were down in price. That was also a change after 3 months in a row with no commodities down in price. 28 were reported up in price. So yeah, talk about this dynamic, this relief, and does it have the potential to be lasting?
So we're back below $70 a barrel, which is where we were in February for oil, which is a good U.S., which is a good sign. And we started to see commentary come through that prices for gasoline, fuel, and diesel are down, but they're also still up for some respondents. So optimistically, what I'm viewing that is we hit the cap. And now we're on the downslide of those prices. Now, petroleum-related products are still catching up. So they hit the up in price in May for the first time, and then again in June. And depending on how well we all did as a community in buying ahead to avoid the impacts of the higher petroleum prices, will determine how long we see that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see petroleum products up in price for the next 3 to 4 months. So good signs from a change, given that I think it was Tommy, whoever the lead actor is in Landman.
Not familiar with that one. Yeah.
It's about oil drillers and oil producers and everything that you use almost is petroleum or petroleum related, whether it's directly in the product or whether it was used in something to then help make the product or deliver the service. So as we see those go down, I think we did a pretty good job on managing that. The nice part is that it didn't last very long, hopefully, fingers crossed. And then we continue to see that improvement. The supply management folks in our mid-year or semi-annual are telling us that we're going to see very low pricing increases for the rest of the year, about 1.2% for the remainder of the year, and we saw 7.4 for the first half. So all in all, Dan, seems like a pretty good picture. The numbers are starting to come through, and the commentary is starting to come through, supporting that point of view from the mid-year.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another index reading that a lot of people liked. That was the employment index, which returned to expansion for the first time since February, if my math is correct. 51.2%. That was up from 47.9% in May. There were mixed results on some other jobs data last week that I'm sure many of our viewers saw. But obviously our readings, the ISM's readings, were positive. Manufacturing was close to expansion at 49.7, and services, as I just mentioned, returned to expansion for the first time in 4 months. Of those companies surveyed, 16% reported hiring, up from 13.5% in May. 10.9% reduced headcounts. That's down from 17.2% the month before. We mentioned the World Cup a little bit as a factor, obviously not that big because accommodation, some of the industries that, would be directly impacted by that, as you noted, not a big part of the GDP, but it's still fun to talk about, which we will. But yeah, just discuss some of the various factors that went into that employment index increase.
So the perspective that you shared in terms of the industries, the number of industries and that type of thing, I looked in a little bit more detail because as a diffusion index, the input that we get from members of different industries are weighted based on GDP. So I took a look at the GDP numbers. So 33% were up in employment or showing expansionary in the employment index in May. And 58% of GDP was represented by those saying employment is expanding for their companies. So in June. So certainly a very sizable increase, and 50 is flat. So if we had 100% of the companies say no change, we'd be at 50. So we're seeing, even though it's only 9 of the 18 companies or half of the companies in expansion, it's 58% of U.S. GDP, not services GDP. So good sign, good promise. And then when you look at the last 6 months of our PMI being where it is, the last time we saw an average for the last 6 months where we are today was the second half of 2022. So all really good reinforcing numbers. The way I interpret it, Dan, is that backlog is up to a historically high number. So that's a positive sign. I think it's the second highest we've had in some time. Actually, I could just look at it here rather than talking. Yeah, so we were at 55.9 in February. Last time we got above 50 before that was in February of 25 at 51. Next time we got above 50 was 50.6 in July of 24. So we don't have backlogs above 50 very often, except for the last 5 months. So the way I tie that all together is we've got sustained backlogs, increasing backlogs because it's above 50, and strong numbers in our overall PMI showing orders and business activity. So companies are saying, it makes sense. We can judiciously invest in employment and hiring more than we have today. So really good sign.
Yeah.
And no commentary yet saying AI is eliminating jobs.
Right. Yeah, we'll discuss that a little bit. You had a great observation, especially in some of the commodities and short supply list about that. And yeah, we'll touch on that in a bit. I was just wondering, with the talk about the World Cup, obviously that's going to generate a lot of economic activity in the cities that are hosting it. You've got travel, and maybe it's just the sports fan in me. I was reminded of a Services PMI roundup that I had written. It was August 2023. Obviously, it was a good month for the services sector at that time. And I joked that, that report, that story that I wrote, it had to be the only document of any kind in ISM history that mentioned Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and Barbie. The first two because they had big concert tours that were headlining at the time. And you may remember the Barbie movie that came out that was really big. And economists determined that, those events had a tangible impact on the economy that month. But yeah, just as we don't talk about it that much. I mean, we try to highlight it at ISM and stories, how the supply chain into events goes into that, and how it can be a boost. But yeah, just discuss that, the business activity that comes from events, and the impact on the economy, that they can provide, like we're kind of seeing, with soccer this month.
Yeah. So we're a consumer economy, a consumer-driven economy. So I think once you start putting money into the economy around advertising, you drive, in information, arts, entertainment, and recreation. You start to drive activity there. So even though accommodation and food services is less than 3% of GDP, transportation is another 3%, and some of the other support activities, wholesale trade to support those retailers, and then retail was also up. So all very positive signs that when consumers are happy and engaged, which, boy, I don't know that you could look at any happier or engaged fans than what we've seen in World Cup for teams that were still in it at the time that they were being videoed. Really, really positive sign. And then as you have that transportation and other services starting to peak up, you also then have more money in the economy, which then that money goes to other places. Dan, one of the things I did not see is any commentary noting positive economic activity related to Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's wedding. So maybe that'll be excitement in July.
Well, yeah, the documentary movie may be coming out soon, so we may have some delayed impact from that, but we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, you talked about AI earlier, and I thought you made a good observation. I thought in the report, as it relates to supplier deliveries and some of the the commodities that are in short supply there. Let's report first, the supplier deliveries index at 54.4%. That kind of eased slightly in June, indicating longer lead times, while the commodities listed in short supply increased from 5 to 9. That observation that you made, that each commodity is important in data center construction, and that's obviously something that's been in the news a lot. The AI and tech investment surge, we talked about that a little last month in our conversation. Just talk about that, that continuing impact on the data.
So, I was trying to see what links I could put together, and certainly, even though we're seeing memory and some related components up in price on a consistent basis, it can't really tie that. It just doesn't seem to be a significant enough number to really move prices paid for utilities or for data centers and information up that high. And then when you looked at supplier deliveries for utilities, so data centers are not utilities, but when you see competition for high voltage breakers and others that are in other similar things like copper and aluminum, you think, okay, so maybe there is some bleed over from the data center activity to utility activity. But the leading industry showing faster supplier deliveries is utilities. So trying to tie those all together, I got to say I'm a little bit stumped in how all of them fit together. What I do know is that if short supply items that are all required for data centers continue to increase in terms of the quantity and frequency, that certainly will have an impact in our ability to grow those data center installations, which in some cases appear to be massive. In fact, they're so massive, it's hard to believe that that's the scale that they'll actually achieve.
Yeah.
1.5 times the size of Manhattan Island. That seems, seeing the buildings in Manhattan Island, it seems like a large installation.
Right. Well, as we always do, we'll highlight a comment and just to kind of flesh it out and discuss it a little bit more. And the one that I picked is from a comment and from a panelist in agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. And I picked it, and I'm sure you picked it for the report. There's a lot going on in it. So I'll just go ahead and read it. He or she wrote that extreme drought in Virginia is creating financial problems for farmers and the agricultural industry. Dramatically reduced spring crops harvest has created significant cost increases in feed expense. The barley grain crop was nearly totally lost due to early hot weather and spring freeze. The financial stress from higher costs due to the Iran war and drought-related forage losses has resulted in decreased spending in the agricultural sector. Obviously, a lot of moving parts and dynamics going on there. Just it kind of encapsulates the variety of challenges that many companies, especially in that particular industry, are dealing with.
Yeah, and when you looked at the industries that are expanding, we see agriculture is not one of them. So it seems like, in fact, they were the fastest contracting. Was when you look at the report, the order in which they're written in the different sections, either expanding or contracting, they're the top of the list, and that's not the top of the list you want to be at. The top of the list of contracting. So looking at that, trying to find, okay, what commentary did we have, which talked broadly about some of the impacts. I thought that one had a good summary, and was from someone in the industry that works a lot with farmers and people who are producing the food. So it seemed to hit various different parts of that ecosystem. With the inability or reduced ability to get economical fertilizers and be able to use them for growing food, whether it's food for cattle and pigs and others, or whether it's food for us. That's one of the impacts of the Ukraine war that seems to miss, at least in what I read, it seems to miss or not be publicized very often. But a significant impact from one of the input stocks into fertilizer comes out of that region. And the more intense that fighting gets, I think the more intense we'll see shortages on getting that feedstock into supply chains.
Yeah. It'd be really interesting. Obviously, it didn't impact the June data, but the news of the heat dome and the tremendous heat that the East Coast and the Midwest is experiencing. It kind of will be interesting to see if that plays, how big of an impact that will have on the July data when we get it. Demand was a little bit slower, obviously, but still solid. Business activity index 55.4%, new orders index at 55.1. They were slower, but I mean, anything to be concerned about there? Obviously, any number in the 55 is going to be solid and good, but yeah, just give us the lay of the land there.
Yeah, I would just add that it's faster, but not as fast as it was. So if we had, for example, a set of companies that said, we're not higher than we were last month, we're the same, they're a 50 effectively. So seeing a little bit of a drop there doesn't concern me. What we did see, though, to overall PMI, a drop from 17 companies saying they're in expansion to 14. And then similar, what we saw, exactly what you said, more than a 2% or 2 percentage point drop in new orders and business activity index, which means those aren't as hot as they were, but they're still moving positively. I'd go back, Dan, to my comment about us being above the 12-month average on all four sub-indexes, and the highest 6-month streak that we've seen since July to December of 22. So really positive strength across the board. If we can keep prices in check and hopefully reduced oil prices, reduce gas and fuel input into transportation costs, warehousing, the ability to keep things cool, all of the input costs that are troublesome when petroleum is high, and then all of the from lipstick to to fertilizer for input costs that are impacted by petroleum as well. It seems like we're on a good path. And the thing that gives me also some confidence is that backlog of orders number, which is going up, and employment going up along with it. All seems to be positive indicators for where we're headed.
Yeah. Just to give you those exact numbers, business activity was 55.4, which was down from 57.7 in May. New orders 55.1%, down from 57.3 in May. Obviously, as Steve mentioned, not as hot as they were the month before, but obviously still very good. And the backlog number, 54.9%, that was up 3.6 percentage points from 51.3. An index that did take a big change compared to the previous month was the inventories index. We talked about it a lot last month. It reached its highest level, or tied its highest level, since Services PMI data was started to be collected back in 1997. But it came down this month, down to 51.2%. That was down from 62.5 the month before. Also, inventory sentiment had its lowest reading since April of 23 at 52.6%. Yeah, did any of those results either of those results surprise you at all?
So just how big the drop was month over month for inventories, it seemed like going from very high inventory, so many companies saying we're higher than we were last month, to then flattening out, to be, okay, maybe it's an elevated level, but we're not higher than we were last month. Seemed like we would see that higher than last month go for another month, just given how quickly supply chains do or don't operate. A little bit of a drop in the supplier deliveries index, so still slower than last month, if you by definition, but maybe that gave a little bit of relief there. Hard to determine for sure. I think there was a lot of activity and commentary around buying ahead about 2 months ago. That decreased, but there was still some commentary around doing that for petroleum-related products, in particular resin. So we saw a couple of comments from respondents that they were still buying ahead for resin. But the number seems like not only are we not increasing inventory at the level we did last month, we're happier about where we are based on the inventory sentiment. Commentary was balanced. We had some of the commentary was we're getting more projects and new business, and others that were taking it on the other side were we finished major projects that drew down from inventory, and then right in the middle we have our annual physical where we drove down inventory between last month and or between May and June. We saw commentary on both of those. And so, maybe we're at a low and we'll see some increased inventory going up. I would expect to see that with the backlog where it is, that next month we'll see inventory peak up a little bit more, but wait and see. Hopefully the strength continues and we're able to reach kind of a lasting agreement in the Middle East that, such a humanitarian tragedy. It'd be nice to see for everybody. That get back on the right path.
Yeah. The last index reading that we'll discuss before we, go into a summary and wrap it up is the imports index. That went into contraction at 49.4, mild contraction, obviously. Not concerning by itself. It's been in contraction before in the last year multiple times. But down from 55.2% in just 3 months, that's somewhat unusual activity. A couple of the comments I noticed in the report mentioned prices and tariffs as an issue. Just talk about some of the dynamics that worked into the activity that we've seen in that index the last few months.
Yeah. So on the imports, there was the only sub-index or only index that was below 50. And then when you look at 4 months in a row, we were above 50, and much more commentary than we saw this month around buying ahead. It seems to me to make sense that after several months of more import activity than the month prior, we're just about at 50, just slightly down. that what did surprise me though, Dan, is the frequency of the tariff comments still.
Mm-hmm.
I expected that those would be much smaller, continuing to pass away. But I guess there's so much activity and uncertainty around that and I guess to go to the clairvoyance of our respondents, if you look back at our annual, there were, I believe it was right around the half of the respondents said they would wait 6 months or more, or not at all, before passing through tariff increases. And so here we are 6 months later, and maybe I should have expected it, but I was a little surprised by the amount of commentary on tariff impacts to pricing, and whether that has a negative impact to imports. I would expect it would have some marginal negative impact.
Yeah. I discussed this with Sue last week. I mean, obviously we've got a pivotal date in the July. The 150-day window on the replacement tariffs is going to expire. Unlikely that Congress is going to extend them. So, I mean, the Trump administration will likely have a response, after those expire. Do you think that could be, adding to the anxiety a little bit?
Well, I would expect to see that in the inventory numbers. If people were thinking it was bad news and it would be a problem, we'd be buying more ahead now. Maybe there's some optimism, and maybe that's leading into the reduced imports and the lower inventory numbers, is that people are holding off because they're thinking that's going to be good news in July. I think there's 2 or 3 more swings at the ball that are going to come out of the administration before, if Congress ever acts on getting something that is some type of a compromise deal. Seems like that would be an appropriate thing for our governing bodies to do, but for some reason it's really difficult.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot to talk about, and I wanted to make sure that, got everything that, you wanted to talk about in. I figured the half hour would go pretty quickly, and it has. So, we're at the bottom of the hour here. And before we wrap up, Steve, anything that I didn't ask or anything that we haven't talked about that might be important, or, if you're an executive or a CEO, or, what are some of the impressions that you should take away before we wrap up?
Dan, back 6 months ago, we were talking about the inflection shifting in terms of a reduced average PMI to an increased average PMI over the trailing 12 months. And that as that continued to go, senior executives should be looking at hiring and making sure you get key talent now when it's available, rather than waiting until everything picks up. I think they missed it if they didn't take advantage of it. I think we're in a really solid place from a services industry, and we're starting to see it. One data point doesn't make a trend, but I was expecting to see the employment number in May to go up above 50, and it didn't. It actually dropped, right? And it dropped by 0.1 percentage point from April to May. It looks like we're in a solid place, and a lot of the commentary is supporting that we're going to be hiring, especially key talent, going forward. It looks like a good time to hire.
Yeah. Well, hey, that article that I wanted to mention that at the top that Steve co-wrote will be in the July-August issue of Inside Supply Management. That goes live online Wednesday. The topic is strategic synergy, and discusses how AI doesn't fix silos or bad decisions. It exposes and accelerates them, which makes leadership and organizational alignment especially critical. So there's a lot of great content about technology and risk in the issue, and you'll want to catch it. Again, that goes live on Wednesday. Hey, Steve, thanks a lot. I appreciate your insights, not only here, but also for the magazine, and we'll see you next month. And thanks to you for joining us today. In a little bit, you can go to the ISM's website and read the roundup article that details a lot of what Steve and I have discussed here. And if you want to be a part of the ISM Manufacturing or Services Business Survey panels that help compile data for the ISM PMI reports, visit ismworld.org/join the panel for more information. Also, go there and look for that magazine issue on Wednesday. I know you'll want to check it out. And we'll see you back here next month when we break down the ISM PMI reports data for July. So for Steve Miller and some good people who helped us behind the scenes today, they are Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens. I'm Dan Zeiger. We'll see you next time.